UFC president Dana White is dead set on booking Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic for the UFC heavyweight title later this year. And it is an absolute catastrophe. It is an abomination. It is a disgrace to the sport. And while I covered this extensively in 2023, I've kind of ignored it for the first half of 2024. I've covered it a little bit here and there, but it's kind of been in the back of my mind because we don't have a date for it yet. Well, it's creeping closer and closer and closer. And Dana White at the UFC 303 post-fight presser is simping for Jon Jones. You have another video that recently came out that we're going to take a look at where Dana White is just drooling all over Jon Jones. And then even more recently, Stipe Miocic did an interview where he said something that actually really pissed me off. Where he says, yeah, the fans need to stop crying. I'm not holding up the division. And I kind of understand what he was trying to say, but we're going to take a look at that interview, and I'm going to break down and translate some of the things that Stipe Miocic says for you, because it really is quite aggravating, and we get some kind of information about a potential date for Jones versus Miocic. But there's a couple things I really want to break down in this video. One, I want to break down why Dana White is simping so hard for Jon Jones about the pound-for-pound #1 ranking, which I've covered extensively recently in another video, which I will link down in the description. I want to cover something that I keep seeing a lot of people say. How funny would it be if Stipe Miocic just brutalized Jon Jones and won the heavyweight title? I'm here to tell you that that's an absolute catastrophe for the heavyweight division. I don't want that to happen at all. And lastly, I'm going to cover in this video, and hearing me say this is going to piss a lot of people off, but we're going to break it down. Stay to the end of the video and listen to what I have to say about it. The UFC is protecting Tom Aspinall from Jon Jones. It may seem like Jon Jones is ducking Tom Aspinall, and to a certain degree, I understand why that narrative is there, and to a certain degree, that narrative is true. But at the end of the day, I truly believe the UFC is protecting Tom Aspinall. So we're going to break that down in this video as well. So we got a lot to cover. Let's jump into Dana White at UFC 303. As I said before, I covered this extensively. This is just a few clips of Dana White simping out for Jon Jones over and over and over again. And shout out to Kevin Iole for actually challenging him. If you want to check out my full video on this, it's like a 25-minute video. Again, it'll be linked below. But we're just going to listen to a couple excerpts. The first question, I believe, is from John Morgan. And they ask, could Pereira interject himself into the Jon Jones saga and maybe you deviate from Jones versus Stipe? And this is what Dana had to say.
Is there any chance that he injects himself into Jones-Stipe, for instance? Or, I mean, you still committed to that?
I forgot that I left a question there, but are you still committed to Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic?
Yeah, no, we're definitely committed to that. I mean, you know how I feel about Jon Jones, you know, as far as where he sits in the pound-for-pound rankings and the all-time rankings. And then Stipe is, you know, looked at as the greatest heavyweight of all time. So,
yeah, he's committed to it. He's committed to that fight. That makes absolutely no sense. The only fight to make, and I know technically now you have Tom Aspinall versus Curtis Blaydes coming up at UFC 304. The only fight to make is Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. If you're not making that fight, strip Jon Jones. Strip him of the heavyweight title. And we're going to look at one more clip here because I've already showed this previously, so I don't want to get too much into it. But this is how badly Dana White is simping for Jon Jones. This is him having a back and forth with Kevin Iole that he created when Kevin Iole challenged him. Well, Jon Jones isn't really active. So how can he be pound for pound #1? Which I've already broken that down extensively.
no matter what you think of Jon Jones, he's the fucking best ever, and he's the pound for pound best fighter in the world. And he's the pound for pound best fighter in the world.
Yeah. Well, except that he hasn't fought in the last year, so he's not.
Because he got hurt.
Yeah, but what about the last 4 years? What about the last 4 years, Dana? He's fought once since, what, February of 2020? Makes no sense, but...
He got injured.
But if you don't...
If you were coming into a fight and you fucking got hurt, that means you're not the pound for pound best fighter in the world anymore? How does that even make sense? It doesn't make sense.
When he fights,
right? If he was sitting out and fucking getting arrested and running...
He quite literally did in the last 4 years. I hate to keep jumping in because I just want to show this clip as kind of a, you know, prequel to what we're about to get into. Dana drives me nuts. Inactivity, inactivity, inactivity. You do not get pound for pound status in 2024 by Uncle Ricoing your way into the pound for pound rankings. That's not how it works. Yeah, coach would have put me in fourth quarter. We would have took states. No, he's got one win since, February of 2020? And that win hasn't aged quite well, and he barely won that against Dominic Reyes. So to sit here and advocate for Jon Jones pound for pound number one is annoying. We're going to break down why he's doing this.
Around or whatever, and you're like, well, Jon Jones is inactive. I'd say, maybe you're right, but as an educated adult who knows the fight business, you cannot deny that while Jon Jones is active, he is the greatest fighter in the world.
Did I not say that?
Yes. I don't know what you're arguing about here. I don't even know how we're in this conversation. Where are the helicopters when you need them?
So anyway, key words from Dana there. When he is active. Dana's conflating pound for pound and greatest of all time. I'm not some Jon Jones hater. I believe Jon Jones is the greatest of all time. He's conflating the two things. As an educated adult in the fight business, you should know the difference between pound for pound and GOAT status, Dana. But that's besides the point. We now have a new clip of Dana White with this little, I don't know, trading card show. I don't even know what you call it. Look how bad he goes out of his way to just ride Jon Jones into the ground, just rim him into the ground. It's a complete embarrassment. I thought this clip was pretty funny. It's not that long. A cut off. I don't know where to find the full thing. I looked for the full thing. It took me 30 minutes just to find this in general. But they're looking at cards on a live stream or whatever. They pull out a Jon Jones card and watch Dana go off here.
It's refractor. Ooh, Jon Jones.
That's badass. That is fucking badass. Look at that card.
That's a very special card.
Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. That is badass, brother. You know this guy has 2 German Shepherds and he shoots guns? And wait till you hear what he did to teenagers during some unrest in his hometown. He was smacking spray paint cans out of their hands as a vigilante. Pound for pound number one? I think so. I think so.
Like the king.
Look at us. Look at this shit-eating grin. You would have think he's talking about power slap right now.
That's nasty. Greatest fighter in the world. Greatest.
Are you even asking me this?
Ruben pulls this deck out of his ass.
Greatest
Are you
fighter in the
kidding
world.
me right now?
Works.
He's got a Jon Jones card that looks like a king, and read the next one.
You've recently said Jon Jones goes into a room with somebody, he's the only. Hold on, let's go.
I would have loved to have seen that finish out, but I couldn't find that. Throw him in a room with Tom Aspinall. Would love to find out what happens. Throw him in a room with Tom Aspinall. Complete and utter embarrassment. Obsessed with rim jobbing Jon Jones. And I broke this down recently in my other video, but I'm going to explain it again in this video. This is going to be a video that encompasses the entire Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic situation up until this point, and then we're going to look at the Stipe Miocic interview. But the reason that Dana White is so sycophantically worshiping Jon Jones and saying, yeah, he's pound for pound number one, is because he's trying to manipulate the media who makes the rankings into putting Jon Jones as pound for pound number one. He's trying to get Blood and Sweat and Honolulu 9.5 and Slimeball FM to adjust the rankings. Unfortunately for him, it backfired because the rankings just changed. The pound for pound rankings just changed. Islam Makhachev's number one, rightfully so. Number 2 is Alex Pereira. And number 3 is Jon Jones. So Jon Jones slid down one spot because guess what? He may be the GOAT, but he's not active right now. So he can't be pound for pound number one when he just beat Cyril Gane in the last 4 years. That doesn't cut it. That does not cut it. So moving on to the Stipe Miocic interview. I'm just dying that it backfired on him. He's going to be pissed when he comes back. So what's the media doing? He's going to change who's allowed to make the pound for pound rankings very shortly because he's so mad that Jon Jones slipped to number 3 because a date is imminent. A date is imminent, and Dana White wanted to be able to promote Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic as number 1 pound for pound Jon Jones versus the greatest heavyweight of all time, Stipe Miocic. By the way, before we get into the Stipe Miocic interview, let's go down to the heavyweight rankings. How is Stipe Miocic ranked number 6? How is he ranked number 6? How is he in the rankings? He hasn't fought. Let me break this down for you if you're a loyal watcher of the channel. Stipe Miocic has not fought since March of 2021, before I even started my channel. I have not seen Stipe fight since I started my channel. That's how long ago that Stipe Miocic fought. So blood and sweat needs to get to work. Get Stipe Miocic out of the rankings. It's funny how the UFC will manipulate the rankings by taking certain guys, making them ineligible because they're turning down fights or whatnot. But Stipe's squatting on his rank, and at least he's got demoted to number 6. If he was number 1, I'd be heated. If he was number 2, I'd be even more heated. But number 6, okay. So now Dana White has to say, oh, number 3 pound for pound versus number 6 in the heavyweight. He's trying to manipulate the media. Let's move on to Stipe Miocic. Now we have some discussion about the date of, by the way, this is a great interview. Shaq MMA. I'll link the full interview down in the description if you guys want to go check it out. But Stipe Miocic is asked about a date. And I just realized Stipe's kind of like a Michael Chandler here. He's just not out rimming Jon Jones in the public. You know, like Michael Chandler's got one dude on his mind and, you know, checking his Instagram every 5 minutes, seeing if he's lifting heavy weights and, you know, waiting around for him like his life depends on it. Stipe's kind of doing the same thing, but at least he's, you know, saving cats out of trees and answering phones at the fire department and whatnot. But he's asked about a date. Here's what Stipe has to say about a date.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what they were talking about too in New York again. But like I said, that's what they're targeting, but not 100%.
So he was asked, are they targeting New York in November? That's what Jon Jones has said. Because recently, Jon Jones answered a comment on Instagram where he says, November 9th, Madison Square Garden. I know it seems like a dream, but it's really happening. So there you go. That's the date of Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. What a disgrace of a fight. I mean, I know I've already covered this so much, and I hate going over some of the same things, but, you know, it's been since really last year. How are we giving a title shot to a guy that looked like this in his last fight? Stipe looked like this in his last fight. You know what I mean? I had a cookout for 4th of July. I could have used Stipe. We needed some extra seats because this man got folded like a lawn chair way back in 2021. And now he's getting a title shot. How does that make sense? How does that make sense? Coming off a loss in March of 2021 gets you a title shot in November of 2024. And shout out to this guy, Shaq, because he actually points that out. He actually points that out in this interview. And first he asked him, I'm going to play the question. He asked him, how long are you willing to wait for Jon Jones? Because you're pulling a Michael Chandler here. So how long are you willing to wait?
I'm being a little salacious here, but is there a year in the calendar of human history where you're like, okay, this fight's taking too long being made? Like, are you going to wait till 2027 if it comes to it?
By the way, you don't need to be disrespectful to these fighters to ask decent questions. This is a very good question. How long are you going to wait, Stipe? What's going on? You know, you already sat out 3.5 years after getting folded by Francis Ngannou. I mean, think about how crazy that is. His last win was 2020. August of 2020 against Daniel Cormier. How long has Cormier been retired at this point? I think that was his last fight. Yeah, that was his last fight. So Cormier will be retired over 4 years by the time Stipe Miocic gets his next win. So shout out to this guy for asking, how long are you willing to wait?
I mean, I don't know. We'll see. I honestly don't know. I just gonna keep training and we'll see what happens, you know. And yeah, that's all I got to say.
All right, Boomhauer, thank you. So basically, he's gonna keep training. He's gonna sit out and wait until he's 80 years old because Stipe's actually, and I know this is the heavyweight division, so it doesn't matter as much. Stipe's 41, going on 42 in August. So Stipe's wasted a large portion of his career sitting out waiting for this fight. Next question. Another great question here. I think I might have left some of it in here, to be quite honest, for this timestamp. He's like, you've been out 4.5 years. What the hell? You know? How do you know you're still going to be like in your prime? How do you know you're going to be ready to contend when you've been sitting out for 4.5 years? Which was a mistake on his end. It was 3.5 years, and he corrects himself here in a second. Or Stipe corrects him, and then he corrects himself. But another great question. But, of course, Stipe's just like...
Clades off the top, but it's been 4.5 years or so since you've competed. If 3.5 years, excuse me. I'm not...
That's okay.
I failed 12.
It's only been 3 years. It's only been 3... How dare you? It's been 4 years since he got a win. I wish he would have phrased that. It's been almost 4 years. This August, in 1 month, it'll be 4 years since you got your last win. You know, how do you know you can still even fight? And the way he's walking out, what event was he recently at? He was walking out. He looked like he needed a cane. He looked like he needed a walker. So he corrects him.
12th grade math. Just a fun fact here.
All right, I don't care about his answer that much because he sat out for 3.5 years. one more clip, and then I'm going to show you the one that actually really pissed me off. This next one, I'm just showing you guys because when I see a clip, okay, this is what makes this channel different than other channels. When I see a clip, I see a salacious clip on Twitter, Instagram, whatever it may be, I seek out the original source, and I watch it in its entirety. And I found this, and I thought it was kind of funny, so since I watched it in its entirety, I figured I'd include it. Listen to this question that this guy Shaq asked. I'm beginning to think he's got a little Sean Strickland in him, to be quite honest. The way he's talking, the questions that he's asking Stipe Miocic.
It comes up.
Can you break down?
This man just asked Stipe Miocic if he could break him. Yeah, can you break me? So I don't know where that came from. But look, this is the kind of stuff you find out when you watch interviews in their entirety. A reporter asking Stipe to break him.
Have me ready for whatever fight comes up.
Can you break down for me?
Okay. Now this next clip is the one that inspired me to make this video to begin with, because this really drove me nuts. Stipe kind of complains about the fans complaining that he's holding up the division. I kind of get his point on one hand, but on the other hand, it really drives me nuts. And he's like, yeah, the fans need to stop crying. I'm not holding up the division.
Kind of just stuck waiting.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. And I mean, I feel the same way, but I'm not taking anything away from them. Like, the UFC can do what they want. I'm not, it is what it is. And
so in case you couldn't understand that, it's very hard. He says, well, I kind of understand, but the UFC can do whatever they want. Because he was asked specifically, how do you feel about Tom Aspinall? Like, how do you feel about the situation that Tom Aspinall's in?
There's only one guy I want to fight, is Jon Jones, but at the same time, the UFC can pick who they want to fight. And people don't know this. Like, there's a couple of times where they had, like, I was ready to fight him, and they gave it to another guy. So there's, I mean, what am I supposed to do? You know, but I'm not holding up any division like everyone says. Like, I don't care. Like, do what you want and stop crying.
I know.
He's crying. I'm just saying, like, other, like, fans and stuff like that.
I'll be.
Yeah. So people need to stop. Fans need to stop crying. Fans need to stop crying because he's not holding up the division.
Any division like everyone says. Like, I don't care. Like, do what you want and stop crying.
I'm
not saying he's crying. I'm just saying, like, other, like, fans and stuff like that.
We deserve to cry because this man has sat out for 3.5 years and is getting a title shot. He hasn't had a win in 4 years and he's getting a title shot. That is a disgrace to the sport. Now, I understand what he's saying here. He's saying, look, the UFC is the one making the fights. I'm just here. I want to fight Jon Jones. He said, though, Jon Jones is the only fight I want. And speaking of holding up the division, I understand everything a fighter says isn't fact. It can be taken with a grain of salt. It can be manipulated. But let's take a look at what Tom Aspinall had to say earlier this year. While we are talking about Stipe Miocic, my manager was contacted by the UFC asking if I'd like to fight him on April 13th. Of course, I accepted. Then he says, a little later, we were told Stipe Miocic doesn't want to fight me and only interested in fighting Jon Jones. On that note, I will stop crying, accept it if it ain't going to happen, and I enjoy the fight that me and all the other fans want to see. Legend versus legend for the heavyweight title. Maximum respect, guys. Yeah. Nobody wants to see it, Tom. Nobody wants to see Jones versus Stipe. Old man Stipe Miocic, who's like, yeah, I'm not holding up the division. Yes, you are. You sat out. You refused to fight. I still don't believe, and this is just my own personal belief. I don't have like any facts to back this up. I think Stipe was offered Sergey Pavlovich at UFC 295, and I think he turned it down. I think Dana just kind of covered up for him a little bit because he knows he's going to make the fight anyway. Jones wants to fight, and he's going to make it anyway. So he's not going to shit on Stipe Miocic in the meantime. He's just going to ignore the fact. There's no way. I don't believe that he didn't offer him that fight. They said, oh, look, Pavlovich is the backup. If someone falls out, Pavlovich is going to step in. I knew Jones was never going to take that fight on short notice. I thought Stipe might. I think Stipe turned that fight down, but that's pure speculation by me. And it just really drives me nuts because we have a Stipe Miocic that, again, hasn't had a win since 2020. August of 2020. What's crazy is he's 2-2 in his last 4. And you know what's really crazy? And I waited all this video I saved this gem towards the end of the video. Look at this resume. You have Francis Ngannou, okay? You have Daniel Cormier, Francis Ngannou, Junior Dos Santos, Alistair Overeem, Fabricio Werdum, Andrei Arlovsky, Mark Hunt, Junior Dos Santos, Fabio Maldonado, Gabriel Gonzaga, Roy Nelson, Stefan Struve, Shane Del Rosario, Phil DeFries, Joey Beltran. What do all those fighters have in common? I'm going to pause for a second. Does anyone know what those fighters have in common? None of them are on the UFC roster. This guy right here, or more importantly, this guy right here, does not have a single win over someone on the UFC roster. A single win over somebody on the UFC roster. And we're giving him a title shot. 4 years since his last win. Coming off a loss. 2-2 in his last 4 fights. Squatting on his ranking. 41 years old, going on 42. And he's getting a title shot? What a disgrace the UFC is for putting this together. And we have an interim champ in Tom Aspinall that wants to fight Jon Jones. It's the fight that should have been made. What the UFC needed to do is they need to strip Jon Jones, make Jones versus Stipe without the title. They want to fight each other. They're dead set on fighting each other, sure. But it's just a disgrace that Dana White and UFC want to say, oh, we have the best fight the best. And we're getting Jon Jones versus a guy on a loss who doesn't have a win in 4 years. I know I keep saying it over and over and over again, but it really drives me nuts. And what I believe is truly going on here, and to touch back on what I said earlier in the video, the UFC is protecting Tom Aspinall from Jon Jones. I know that sounds crazy. I know that sounds ridiculous. I know that sounds hyperbolic. But what I believe is going on here is kind of similar to the Francis Ngannou situation. Because Francis Ngannou, I'm not going to go through his entire, story with the UFC. He was willing to sign on for one more fight and fight Jon Jones. The UFC turned him down on that offer. They said, no, if you're not signing a long-term deal, we're not going to book that fight. Well, they didn't want Francis to potentially beat Jones and then leave the UFC. They wanted to have Jon Jones, so if Jon Jones beat Cyril Gane, which he did, they were going to say, oh, well, Jon Jones would have smoked Ngannou anyway. And that's what Dana White has built up. So what they're looking at is they're looking at Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic. They think it's the more promotable fight. They're like, oh, we're going to promote Jon Jones, the greatest of all time, greatest light heavyweight of all time versus the greatest of all time heavyweight in Stipe Miocic. And then win or lose at the end, if they both go and retire, then we promote Tom Aspinall to the heavyweight champion, the undisputed heavyweight champion, and we don't have Jon Jones' shadow lingering over the division. Now, I believe that Jon Jones does not want to fight Tom Aspinall, not because he's scared of Tom Aspinall, not because he thinks he's going to lose to Tom Aspinall, but he sees it as it's a lot of risk for not a lot of reward. He believes that beating Stipe Miocic is better for his legacy and better for his paycheck. And I think that's truly what he believes. But in reality, I don't even necessarily think that's true. I think the fans would get behind more of a Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. But what the UFC doesn't want to happen is, if they were to, let's say they were really to push for it, they could probably make it happen. Jon Jones, Tom Aspinall would be a huge fight. How much bigger would it be than Stipe? I don't know that it even would be bigger. So financially, they're like, oh, we'd rather go with Stipe. And then they can both retire afterwards, and we could just elevate Tom Aspinall and get behind Tom Aspinall, UK fighter, UK market, and capitalize on that. Now, Tom Aspinall has to get through Curtis Blades. Fair enough. But what they don't want to happen is Jon Jones to beat Tom Aspinall and then ride off into the sunset. Because then you have a division that's just left in pure shambles. We've seen the light heavyweight divisions finally recovering after years and years and years. But let's say Jones beats Tom Aspinall and then retires. You have Aspinall, Gane, Pavlich, Blades at the top of the division, and Volkov. So the shadow of Jon Jones would loom over the top of the division forever until you got some new prospects. And it's not easy to find prospects at the top of the heavyweight division. Guys who are that big and that athletic are going to go to other sports like baseball, football, basketball, because they're going to make more money. So it's not easy to find these hot prospects for the heavyweight division. So the last thing the UFC wants is Jon Jones to beat Tom Aspinall and then ride off in the sunset. Now, the last thing I want to discuss is people saying, I hope Stipe beats Jon Jones. And while I do think that would be funny, it'd be catastrophic to the division. Because best case scenario, let's say Jones beats Stipe, and then he says, you know what, I'm going to take on Tom Aspinall. I want to take on Tom Aspinall. I think the UFC would book it. I think they would book it. I think they'd be a little bit nervous. Okay, Jones, you're going to retire after this, or we're going to have you fight another contender. What's going to happen? They would try to build something else up in the meantime, but it'd be a huge fight. They would book it. But if Stipe Miocic beats Jon Jones, the heavyweight division is completely ruined. Because guess what? They're booking a rematch. So now we've waited a year. How long have we waited now? Jon fought in March of 2023. So if he fights in November, that's 8 months, 12 months, 20 months, damn near 2 years for this matchup since Jones tore his bicep. So we already waited 20 months. How long are we going to wait for a rematch? And then what's Tom Aspinall? Tom Aspinall going to just keep defending his interim belt? Would make absolutely no sense. So Stipe beating Jon Jones would be catastrophic for the heavyweight division. I think the best case scenario is Jones wins and then retires and rides off into the sunset. Or if he fights Tom Aspinall, that'd be huge. I still think the UFC is going to be a little bit annoyed because they're going to be like, well, we don't want Jones to beat Aspinall and then ride off into the sunset. So we really don't want that fight. We'd rather just elevate Aspinall and hopefully keep him as a champ for a while to help build that UK market. But I think that's pretty much everything that's going on with the Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic, Tom Aspinall situation. And I can't believe people want to interject Alex Pereira into the heavyweight division. It's already a clusterfuck. We already don't know what's going on. We're not going to have Pereira fight for an interim heavyweight title. So that means Pereira has to wait to see whatever goes on in November, potentially. So you're going to have Pereira, who's super active, who's older, in his late 30s. We're going to have him sit out on the sidelines waiting to see what may or may not happen with Jones and Aspinall and Stipe so that he may get a shot at an undisputed heavyweight title. Makes no sense. Anyone interjecting Pereira into the discussion, I hate you. I hate you. We need to keep Pereira active. The fight is against Magomed Ankalaev. I did an entire video on that. I will link it down in the description as well as the end cards. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for watching.